I want you to understand something before I tell you any of this. I am not a victim. I refuse to be one. Victims are people things happen to, people who stand still while the world rearranges itself around them without consent. What happened to me, what I discovered, what I did about it, that wasn't something that happened to me. It was something that happened because of choices, hers, and then mine. My name is Peter. I'm 34 years old, 6 years married, and I built something real. That matters. Say it again if you need to. I built something real. Not inherited, not stumbled into, not handed over by circumstance. I sold for a living B2B software, regional accounts, the kind of grind where you're on the road more than you're home, where you're memorizing the layout of airport terminals in cities your wife has never visited. I built my career from a junior associate making cold calls in a cubicle to a regional director managing 12 accounts across 3 states. Every dollar of equity in that house, every piece of furniture she chose from catalogs she left open on the coffee table, every weekend trip we took to the coast, I financed all of it with those years on the road. The house itself was her choice. Upper middle class suburb, quiet street, the kind of neighborhood where people mow their lawns on Saturday mornings and wave from driveways. I would have lived somewhere smaller, somewhere with a shorter commute to the airport, but she loved the neighborhood. She said it felt like the kind of place where a life could settle properly. I wanted her to feel settled, so I signed the mortgage without hesitation. Sarah, let me tell you about Sarah the way I used to think about her before the lens cracked. She was my college sweetheart. Sharp humor, the kind that came with actual timing, not performance. She had a way of making an ordinary Tuesday evening, bad takeout, a show neither of us really cared about, feel like something worth coming home to. That sounds small. It wasn't small. After weeks of airports and client dinners and hotel room silence, a bad Tuesday evening with Sarah was the closest thing to peace I knew. We chose not to have children. Not a wound, not a tragedy, a decision, made together over a long conversation early in the marriage when I was honest about my travel schedule and she was honest about not being ready. We agreed to revisit it when my career stabilized. It never became urgent. I don't grieve that now. I am only grateful, deeply, quietly grateful, that there were no children standing in the wreckage of what she chose. And then there was Jake. 11 years. That's how long Jake and I had been friends when everything ended. We met in our mid-20s through a mutual colleague, discovered we had nearly identical taste in bad sports takes and good whiskey, and built the kind of friendship that requires no maintenance because it's simply load-bearing. He was the best man at our wedding. I can still see him on that night, standing up, glass raised, eyes a little wet at the edges, telling the room that he'd never seen me look at anything the way I looked at Sarah, and that he hoped I'd earned her. The room laughed. I remember thinking he was the best man I could have chosen in every sense of the phrase. He was my brother in everything but blood. I want to be fair about the marriage. There were cracks. There is always something. The travel was the main friction point, weeks gone at a time, missed anniversaries, dinners she ate alone. She complained regularly, sometimes with real pain behind it. I worked harder, told myself the money was the point, missed the point entirely. It was the one place where we never quite found resolution. She wanted more of me present. I told myself I was building something for us. We were both partially right. We were both partially using our own narrative as cover. But there was one thing I told her early. One line, drawn clearly, communicated without ambiguity. I sat across from her. This was in the 2nd year of marriage after a stretch of bad travel and tension, and I told her, if this marriage ever breaks down because of infidelity, particularly with someone close to me, I will not survive it quietly. I am not built for quiet devastation. I told her I wouldn't yell or beg or break down publicly. I would simply end everything with the same precision I used for everything else in my life, and I would make sure the ending was complete. She looked me in the eyes across that kitchen table. She said she understood. 6 years later, she chose to test exactly that. I know now that the shift began gradually, small tilts in behavior I cataloged without knowing I was cataloging them. I was watching the horizon, building deals, flying between cities, managing accounts. I wasn't watching the ground beneath my feet. That's the version I tell myself was innocent, and I believe most of it. But there is one detail I can't explain. In a way, she started encouraging my trips. She started suggesting extended travel before I did. She waved me off at the door with a calm smile that hadn't been there the year before. At the time, I felt something close to relief. I thought the marriage had finally found its rhythm, that she'd made peace with the schedule. I thought we'd turned a corner. She knew exactly what she was doing with those smiles. She was learning to use my absence. A woman who hated my absence doesn't suddenly learn to love it, she just learns to use it. I am trained to notice patterns. A career in sales will do that to a person. You learn to read behavioral shifts the way a doctor reads an EKG, watching for the deviation that doesn't fit the baseline. Small change in tone, a pause where there wasn't one before, a question answered just slightly too fast. I built a career on pattern recognition. Which is why I cannot fully forgive myself for not seeing it sooner. I marked the beginning of the shift at approximately 4 months before the trip cancellation. That's the earliest data point I can anchor clearly. Everything before that, the small unease, the nights of lighter sleep, the vague sense that something in the house had been quietly rearranged, those were signals without timestamps. But 4 months out, the pattern became visible. First, the travel. I mentioned this already, but I need to be precise about it because precision matters here. Sarah had spent 5.5 years making clear, sometimes gently, sometimes with real frustration, that my travel schedule was the central wound in our marriage. I accepted this. I worked around it as best I could. I built in video calls on the road, surprised her with early returns when deals closed faster than expected. And still, the complaint remained a constant low frequency beneath everything. Then, in a span of perhaps 2 weeks, it disappeared. She didn't just stop complaining, she started participating in the planning. Mentioning that a client visit I'd described might be worth extending. Noting that a long weekend away would be a good opportunity for her to catch up with friends. Smiling at the door with a warmth that felt specifically designed to make me leave without looking back. I thought it was growth. I thought we'd finally arrived at some adult understanding about the demands of my career. I felt relief so thoroughly that I didn't question the source of the change. That relief was a gift she gave me to keep me looking forward instead of sideways. The phone was next, small thing, the kind of thing you dismiss without a second thought if you weren't paying attention. Sarah had always left her phone on the kitchen counter when we were home, charging, face up, completely unremarkable. It was background furniture, part of the domestic landscape. Sometime around the 4-month mark, the phone stopped being furniture. It went with her everywhere, to the bathroom, into the bedroom before I followed, turned face down on the table when I came home early. The lock screen passcode changed. She explained it away easily. She'd seen a news story about phone theft, changed her habits as a precaution. I nodded. I believed her. I had 3 active deals in 2 states and a quarterly report due. I did not have bandwidth for domestic suspicion. But I noticed. I filed it without knowing I was filing it. Then the evenings. Sarah had a standing group of friends she saw regularly, dinners, the occasional weekend activity, nothing unusual, but the frequency increased, and the specifics grew vague. She'd come home from a girls' night, and when I asked the next morning, casually over coffee, not an interrogation, she described the evening in the kind of generalities that don't come from an actual memory. The restaurant name was approximate. The friend group was slightly shifting. Once I checked a credit card statement, our joint card, my primary account, and saw a charge at a restaurant she hadn't mentioned, in a neighborhood that didn't match the story, on a night she claimed to have been at a friend's place across town. I didn't bring it up. I told myself there was an explanation. I went back to my quarterly report. I want to be honest about why I didn't confront her earlier. It wasn't cowardice, exactly. It was something colder, a recognition, forming slowly at the back of my mind that if I asked and she denied it, I would be in a worse position than I was right now. A denial I couldn't disprove would give her the advantage. I needed to know before I said anything. The instinct to wait, to gather, to be certain, that instinct would eventually save me. But in those early weeks, it felt like nothing more than avoidance. What cracked something open in me, the detail I cannot file away under innocent explanation, no matter how I angle it, was Jake. We had spoken at least once a week for 11 years. Not long conversations always, sometimes 10 minutes, sometimes and who are, depending on what was happening in either of our lives. Sports results, work frustrations, the general maintenance of male friendship conducted primarily through mockery and the occasional real admission. The calls were a constant. They had been a constant since we were 23 years old. They stopped. Not dramatically. No fight, no cooling off, no event I could point to. Jake simply became quieter. He responded to my texts slowly, in short sentences that didn't invite follow-up. He turned down 2 invitations, one to watch a game, one to grab dinner, with reasons that were technically plausible. I told myself he was buried at work. I told myself he had things going on that he wasn't ready to talk about yet, because that happens with men, we go quiet under pressure. I did not connect his silence to Sarah's new smiles. I did not connect any of it yet. I booked the Atlanta trip, a week-long client summit, hotel already reserved, itinerary confirmed. Sarah kissed me goodbye at the door with a warmth I hadn't felt from her in months. Both hands on my face, eyes closed for a moment, the full performance of a wife sending her husband off with affection. I remember standing at the door with my bag in my hand, thinking, see, this is what we've been building toward. This is the marriage finding its level. In the car on the way to the airport, the warmth faded and something else moved in its place. My gut, the same pattern-reading mechanism I'd spent 11 years sharpening, spoke plainly for the first time. Something in that house isn't right. I drove to the airport. I boarded the flight. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was projecting work stress onto a marriage that was finally improving. 2 days later, the client's office called to tell me there was a family emergency and the summit was being postponed by 3 weeks. My first reaction was frustration. A week of scheduling rearranged, accounts to notify, a hotel to cancel. My second reaction came quieter underneath the first. It was not relief. It was not excitement at an unexpected week home. It was something more deliberate than either of those things. I didn't tell Sarah the trip was canceled. I told myself I wanted to surprise her. But I'm an honest man, and honesty demands I say this. Somewhere beneath the story I told myself, I already knew what I was going to find. The surprise wasn't for her. The silence was for me to ensure the advantage remained exactly where I needed it. The phone call came at 2:47 in the afternoon. I remember the time because I looked at it, the way you look at a clock when something shifts and you understand, without quite being able to articulate it, that this moment is going to divide time into before and after. Before the cancellation, after the cancellation. I set the phone down on the hotel desk and sat completely still for approximately 90 seconds. Not shock, not relief, calculation. The plan was already forming before I could consciously name it. I would not call Sarah. I would not go home yet. If there was something to find, and the thing in my chest that I had been suppressing for weeks was insisting loudly now that there was, I would find it with both hands before I walked through that door. I opened my laptop. Our joint credit card account had my name as the primary holder, which meant complete access to statements going back 3 years. I exported the last 3 months as a PDF and started reading. The pattern was not subtle once I stopped looking for reasons to explain it away. Hotel charges, not the kind of hotel you book for yourself, mid-range properties that sat in the city near our house. Restaurant charges at places she'd never mentioned to me, reservations for 2 at the kind of establishments where you book in advance because you're planning something. A cash withdrawal pattern on a card she used more frequently in recent months, small enough not to draw attention individually, consistent enough to form a line when you laid them end to end. I cross-referenced with her social media, the public posts, the photos from her girls' nights that sometimes materialized and sometimes didn't. The timestamps were wrong, not dramatically wrong, just slightly wrong. The kind of wrongness that a person not looking for it would scroll past without a second thought. I called our phone carrier. The account was under my name, my social security number, my credit. I had full legal access to the account records. I requested a detailed usage report for the last 4 months on both lines, and they emailed it to me within 20 minutes. I printed it in the hotel business center. I carried it back to my room and sat down at the desk under the window with the afternoon light coming in flat and gray, and I started reading the call logs. Jake's number appeared 43 times. 43. Calls made at 10 p.m., at midnight, at 12:30 in the morning on a Wednesday when I was in Phoenix presenting tea. Owe a client about enterprise software licenses. Calls lasting 40 minutes, an hour, once 93 minutes on a Saturday afternoon when she'd told me she was running errands. I put the pages down on the desk. I went to the bathroom. I ran cold water and put both hands under it and stood there breathing through my nose the way you breathe when something has punched directly through the part of you that was still holding out hope. I counted to 30. Then I went back to the desk and I kept reading. I want to be precise about this moment because people always ask, in the versions of this story I've told, which are fewer than you'd think, why I didn't just call. Why I didn't rage, drive home, pound on the door. The answer is that I am not built for theater. I am built for outcomes. Rage is a spectacular waste of the only advantage I had, which was that she still didn't know what I knew. The moment I called, the moment I showed my hand before I'd gathered everything I needed, I would hand her the opportunity to shred evidence, coach a narrative, move money, call an attorney before I had won. I have watched deals collapse because the other side played too early. I was not going to do that. I booked a phone consultation with a divorce attorney that afternoon, not to announce my intentions, but to understand my terrain. He was thorough. He told me clearly, in our state, adultery is a statutory factor in asset division proceedings. Documentation was critical. Financial records established a pattern but required corroboration, either physical evidence placing the parties together or a verified admission. A video or photographic record of the relationship itself would be definitive. He told me to document everything and to do nothing that could be classified as illegal entry, illegal recording, or harassment. I took notes in a document on my phone, time-stamped and clear, and I saved it to my personal cloud account. I also made one other call. A friend who worked in HR at a mid-size local firm, someone I trusted to be discreet, who confirmed, carefully and without specifics, how workplace conduct clauses generally operate when personal scandal becomes publicly documented. Not what I would do with that information, just good to have it. By the time I settled the hotel bill and loaded the car, the picture was complete. Credit card records organized in a folder on my phone's secure cloud storage. Call logs saved in 2 locations. The attorney's number in my contacts under a name that would mean nothing to Sarah if she saw it. I had the full shape of what I was walking into, not every detail, but enough. More than enough. I drove to within 1 street of the house and parked. I walked the rest of the way on foot. The afternoon was quiet in that particular suburban way, a lawnmower somewhere distant, a dog that barked twice and stopped. Our street was empty. Her car was in the driveway. There was another car parked in front of the house that I recognized before I wanted to. I went around to the side entrance. The garage door was unlocked. It was always unlocked. I went through the garage in the dark, and that was when I saw it on the shelf where I'd left it after last fall's yard work season, the baseball bat. Aluminum, aged grip, unremarkable. I want to be truthful about what I was thinking when I picked it up. I told myself it was instinct, protection. You come home to a strange car and an empty street and you reach for what's available. That's what I told myself in the moment. Months later, with everything that followed sitting cleanly in the past, I'm still not completely sure that was the entire truth. But it's the truth I'm giving you now. I went through the interior door into the kitchen. The house was quiet downstairs, the kind of quiet that has weight to it. I could hear them from the ground floor. I stood at the base of the stairs and I heard what I had refused to fully imagine for 4 months, and the cold thing in my chest became a solid object, crystalline and permanent. I climbed the stairs, one hand on the railing, the bat in my other hand, completely steady. The door was open. I don't know if that detail made it worse or simply more complete. Like they had performed this enough times to stop being afraid of getting caught. Like my house had been accommodating them for long enough that they'd stopped factoring in the possibility that it might stop. I stood in the doorway and I looked at what was in my bedroom. I want to tell you what I felt in that doorway. Not what you'd expect, not the white-hot surge of rage that movies have trained us to anticipate, not the desperate animal grief that breaks men open in front of an audience. What I felt was something far stranger and, in retrospect, far more dangerous than either of those things. It was cold. It was still. It was the sensation of watching a hypothesis become a confirmed result, the clinical arrival of certainty after months of suspicion. I registered the scene. I will not dress it up, but I will not sensationalize it either. Sarah backed to the door, laughing at something she'd said. Jake, unmistakable. My bedroom, my sheets. The house I signed the mortgage for because she loved the neighborhood. I pulled out my phone first. 30 seconds of footage, clean and clear. Steady hand, steadier than it had any right to be. I saved it immediately to 2 locations, my personal cloud and a secondary backup account I had set up 2 days prior specifically for this purpose. I did not rush. I did not shake. I gave the recording 15 full seconds before I said anything at all. Then I said his name. One word, Jake. The room detonated. Sarah screamed, the kind of scream that is partly fear and partly the sudden terrifying awareness that the structure of everything has changed. Jake moved fast, the way people move when the part of the brain that processes shame has been temporarily outpaced by the part that processes danger. I crossed the room before he made it upright. I struck him twice with the bat. I want to be precise because precision has been my standard throughout this telling. I was angry, yes, but I was not out of my mind. I knew where I was hitting. I chose not to aim for anything that would put me in a courtroom for the wrong reasons. He was hurt. He was bleeding. He was crying in a way that I had not heard from a grown man before and hoped not to hear again. I pulled him into the hallway by his arm and I moved him down the stairs, naked, reduced, bleeding. Everything that he was stripped back to its true dimensions, and I opened the front door and put him through it. He ran. I did not watch him go. I had already turned back toward the stairs. Sarah was sitting on the bed when I came back into the room. Sheets pulled to her chin, face wet, looking at me the way a person looks when they are calculating which version of themselves to present first. The calculation lasted approximately 2 seconds. Then she chose remorse. Peter, her voice broke on my name in a way that 6 months ago would have cost me everything. It was a mistake. This was the first time, I swear to you this was the first time, you have to believe me. I went to her side of the closet. I pulled out a travel bag, one of hers, the navy blue weekender she used for short trips, and I started filling it, methodically. Shirts, pants, the essentials. I didn't look at her while I did it. She shifted tactics without pausing to reload. You're never home. You were never here, even when you were physically in this house. Do you know what that does to a person? Do you know what it's like to be left alone week after week and told it's for us? Her voice had climbed into something higher and more accusatory, the grief packaging itself into grievance. I was lonely. I made a mistake. That does not mean this marriage is over. I continued folding. Socks, a jacket. You're being dramatic. The word dramatic landing in that moment was extraordinary in its audacity. You're going to regret this. You can't just throw 6 years away because you found out I'm human. I set the bag at the door. I turned and looked at her directly for the first time since I'd walked in. Full eye contact. I gave her the complete, settled weight of what I had known for 2 days and what I had suspected for 4 months, and what I had built the evidence for with the patience of a man who understood that the only way to win a war like this was to be ready before the battle was declared. I said, I told you exactly what would end this. You chose it anyway. Nothing else, no additions, no elaboration. The sentence was complete. She started crying again, differently now, the calculation gone, something rawer coming through. Part of me registered it as real. Part of me noted that it didn't matter whether it was real. It was approximately 4 years too late to matter. She was out of the house within the hour. She moved slowly, gathering things from around the room with the dazed deliberateness of someone still trying to process that the architecture of her life had just been permanently altered. She carried the bag downstairs. I heard the front door open. I heard it close. I went to the upstairs window and watched her car in the driveway without the light on. She sat in it for 20 minutes. The brake lights came on twice, went off again. I watched the car the way I watch closing signals in a negotiation, waiting for the definitive move. At minute 22, the headlights came on. The car backed down the driveway slowly. She didn't look up at the window. I went downstairs. I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where 2 years into the marriage I had told her clearly and without ambiguity what would end things between us. I opened my phone. I called my attorney and left a message with the service. Then I opened a notes document and I typed a summary of the evening. Time. Stamped, factual, documented. Arrival time. What I observed. The number of strikes delivered where they landed. Her exact words. The footage saved. Her departure time. I did not cry that night. I've thought about that since. I'm not proud of it as an achievement and I don't offer it as evidence of strength. I simply didn't have the tears available. What I had instead was the quiet of the house and the sound of my own typing and the knowledge, clean and permanent, that the next phase had already begun. She thought the bat and the thrown bag were the ending. She had no idea I was just getting started. Within 48 hours of walking back down those stairs, I had filed for divorce. Not in the heat of the confrontation, not in some impulsive surge of wounded pride. I filed 2 days later after I had slept, after I had eaten breakfast and read through my attorney's notes a second time, after I had confirmed that the video footage was clear and double-backed up and exactly as definitive as I needed it to be. I filed with the calm of a man who had made his decision long before the moment arrived. My attorney, who had been briefed by phone the morning after and met with me in person the following afternoon, moved efficiently. He was the kind of lawyer who did not waste words or gestures, and I appreciated that. The filings cited adultery. Sarah retained her own attorney within the week. I'm told he came with a reasonable reputation. His strategy was immediately legible: minimization on the adultery claim, emotional neglect as a counter-narrative, and a positioning of Sarah as a woman who had been fundamentally abandoned by a husband who chose his career over his marriage. It was not an unreasonable legal play. It might even have worked against a man who had walked in with nothing but wounded feelings and a story. I had walked in with everything else. The credit card records were submitted to my attorney in full, 3 months of documented expenditure, hotel stays, restaurant reservations, the cash withdrawal pattern. They totaled precisely several $1,000s drawn from joint marital assets to finance the relationship with Jake. Each charge was cross-referenced with dates and events, annotated clearly, organized in a format that said, "This is not a man guessing. This is a man who knows exactly what he's looking at." The call logs corroborated everything. 43 instances over 4 months. Times, durations, patterns, the kind of record that does not leave interpretive room. And then the video. 30 seconds clean, unambiguous. My attorney reviewed it and said without expression, "This takes the adultery question entirely off the table." The neglect narrative, the emotionally abandoned wife construct, the suggestion that this was a marriage already finished in practice. All of it collapsed when placed against footage that told a story no counter-narrative could survive. The judge saw the video. I don't know what I expected to feel in that moment. Satisfaction, perhaps, or vindication, the clean arrival of justice. What I actually felt was something quieter, completion. The evidence had done its job. The case was what it was. I didn't need to feel anything dramatic about it. The documentation had already felt everything on my behalf methodically for the past several months. Simultaneously, because I had learned in sales that the best outcomes happen when several things move at once, I made a series of deliberate disclosures outside the courtroom. I called Sarah's father. I want to be precise about this because some people have questioned the decision. I did not send a mass message. I did not post publicly. I did not weaponize social media. I called her father personally, and I told him what had happened in the plainest terms I could manage. I told him I was filing for divorce and why, and I sent him the financial records and call logs, not the video, so that he could not later be told a revised version of events and have no basis for comparison. Her parents were traditional people, faithful people. They received what I sent them and went quiet. Her calls to them went unanswered within the week. 3 people in our mutual social circle received the same documentation package: records, logs, a brief factual account. I chose them specifically not because they were the loudest, but because they were the most honest. People who, when they saw something documented, would not sensationalize it but would also not protect a lie. I didn't ask them to do anything with what they received. Community networks operate with their own momentum. The story spread without another word from me. Sarah had recently started a part-time administrative position at a local firm. I did not contact her employer. That was a boundary I chose to hold, not because I lacked the grounds, but because the direct move was never necessary. 2 members of the social circle, independently and without coordination with me, contacted the firm after seeing the documentation. The firm had a conduct clause in its employment agreements. Sarah was let go before the month ended. I learned this from a mutual acquaintance who mentioned it without drama, and I received the information without drama. Jake was gone. He had left the area, mutual friends confirmed this in passing, nobody making a significant announcement of it. Whatever combination of fear and shame had motivated the departure, I did not examine it closely. He had removed himself from the situation, which was ultimately what I needed. I had no further use for his presence in my life or my accounting of events. The divorce hearing itself was unremarkable in the best possible way. Sarah's attorney made the neglect argument to the judge with the confidence of someone who had not yet fully understood what the opposing evidence packet contained. My attorney allowed the argument to complete before presenting the video. There was a silence in the room after it played that I will not try to describe with great precision, because I was watching the judge's face and not cataloging the silence. The judge ruled accordingly. Adultery confirmed, joint asset misuse documented and factored, alimony denied. The house remained mine, the savings remained mine, the bulk of our shared assets remained mine. Sarah received a minimal settlement, enough to start over, nothing ongoing. The ruling was not punitive beyond what the facts supported. It didn't need to be. She walked out of the courthouse in a wool coat I had bought her 2 Christmases ago, charcoal gray. She looked smaller in it than she had the Christmas morning she opened the box. I did not watch her go. I had a meeting with my attorney about final documentation. I had work to return to. I had a house that was still mine, waiting in a suburb she had once told me felt like a place where a life could settle properly. She thought if she could survive the courtroom, the worst would be over. She didn't understand that the courtroom was only the paperwork. The real verdict had already been delivered everywhere else, in her parents' unanswered calls, in the administrative office where her access badge stopped working, in the social circles that had seen the documentation and quietly closed around its contents. The courtroom made it legal. Everything else had already made it permanent. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I repainted the bedroom. Not right away, I gave myself time to decide whether the house itself needed to go, whether the rooms held too much of what had happened to be habitable. I sat with the question for a few weeks and discovered, somewhat to my own surprise, that the answer was no. The house was not the problem. The house was what I had built. I was not going to let her choice take it from me retroactively, in the way that things can be retroactively taken even after the legal paperwork is settled. I painted the bedroom a different color. I repainted the guest room too while I had the rollers out. I cooked on weeknights, actually cooked, not reheated, and I found I was better at it than the years of hotel food had led me to believe. I slept soundly. I don't say that with pride exactly. I say it as a fact about what my body did when the sustained, low-level vigilance of those 4 months finally had permission to release. I slept like a man who had finished something. I took on regional accounts that didn't require overnight travel. Not because I was hiding, not because I was diminished, but because I had spent 11 years proving something through motion, and I no longer needed to prove it. The drive that had once gone into sustaining a marriage and managing its frictions now went entirely into my own life, which turned out to be a more efficient arrangement. Sarah is in a 1-bedroom apartment across town. I know this only because a mutual friend mentioned it briefly, without emphasis, in the context of a different conversation. I did not ask follow-up questions. Her life, its dimensions and its difficulties, is no longer within the scope of what I track or account for. The settlement gave her enough to begin again. What she does with that beginning is not my consequence. Jake has not returned. No one mentions him. He has become a person-shaped absence in the social landscape we once shared, and the absence has filled in around itself with the particular efficiency of things that everyone knows not to press on. Sarah still sends messages occasionally. They come at irregular intervals, sometimes weeks apart, sometimes closer together. Some of them carry the shape of continuing denial, the argument still being made to an audience that has stopped listening. Some are quieter and harder to read, less like arguments and more like someone testing whether a door is still locked. I do not respond to any of them. I have nothing left to say that wasn't already said by the courtroom, by the evidence packet, by her parents' silence, by the administrative office that quietly deactivated her badge. I close this account the way I opened it, not as a victim, and not as a man who is proud of every moment in this story. I am a man who built something real, watched it be chosen against, and made sure the consequences of that choice were as complete and as documented as I had promised they would be. I told her, in a kitchen across a table 6 years before the ending, exactly what would break things between us. I gave her the full truth of what I would do if she chose it. She knew she chose anyway. Now we both live inside the aftermath of what she chose. The difference is I'm fine with that.